Boy, the question is, why does it take so long to get it? You know what? I wish I knew. And can I say something about this as well? Getting grace is something more than just having it explained to you properly. It's been my experience that there is a spiritual apprehension of this. That there has been people that I have tried to explain this to them and explain this to them, and they never seem to get it, and then one day the lights just go on. And I don't know why. You know, maybe it was something in their life, maybe it was God's timing. I mean, of course, God knows why in all His ways. But there's a spiritual apprehension of this, not only an intellectual or a theological apprehension. I genuinely pray that God has this season for you all here, and that it be a beautiful time of apprehending His grace. That is a wonderful question.
Can you talk more about like this graceless Christianity and what makes it? And I guess kind of connected to that, how does one get out of a graceless Christianity?
You know, graceless Christianity is basically legalism. It's Christianity that puts at its core the idea that I am defined as a Christian because of what I do for God. This is what defines me as a Christian. No. That is graceless, legalistic Christianity. Legalism is very subtle and has many more forms than one can imagine. But at its core, it's that idea that the basis of my Christian life and experience is my performance before God. Grace-filled Christianity understands that the basis of Christian living is what God has done for me. And, as we'll discuss more on tomorrow night and on Thursday night, it has very much the idea of that understanding that I need to stop trying to prove myself worthy of the love of God and simply receive it. I think that these are some of the fundamental ways. We'll explore them more in following evenings. Listen, it's very important to understand that this contrast is between law and grace. And the New Testament is filled with these contrasting ideas. There are many wonderful Christians who really love God and really want to serve Him, who are in the bondage of a legal relationship with God. And many of them don't even know it. But again, at core, they think of their Christian life as something that they must do for God, instead of the joyful, grateful reception of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. There's a lot of implications that we'll get into further, but that's the core of it right there. The question has to do, and I'm just repeating it for the sake of the recording, the question has to do with grace in the Old Testament and in the first century context that the disciples lived with, and if that didn't contribute to their misunderstanding of Jesus on many points. And I would say you're exactly correct. First of all, there's plenty of grace in the Old Testament, expressed by a few different words. One of the great words is this great Hebrew chesed, which has to do with the loving kindness of God, His great. But that's all. But grace is obviously throughout the Old Testament. But one of the great failings of the Pharisees, one of the dominant influences of the Jewish world at that time, even though they weren't dominant numerically, they were certainly dominant in the theology and the practice of their day. They very much had this legalistic approach. They didn't believe that grace didn't exist, and sometimes their resistance to grace has been exaggerated. But yet fundamentally, they looked at their life with God as an idea of their obedience of the law. This was the fundament. This was the core of their relationship with God. And that thinking greatly influenced the disciples and made it difficult for them to grasp on to grace. That's why so often when you find a contrast between Jesus and His disciples, it has to do with grace. You know, the disciples are the ones saying, hey, they rejected our message. Should we call down fire from heaven upon this city? And Jesus is the one saying, no. You know, it's grace from Jesus, and oftentimes it's interfering with the religious conceptions that the disciples had received from their spiritual environment around them. But I'll say this. almost every time when a Christian group has begun to stray from the truth, it's evident in their understanding of grace. You'll notice that. And that's true too, not just in the first century Judaism, but in the subsequent history of Christianity. It's one of the things. You understand why Paul so solemnly warned of the departure from grace. This is what greatly concerned the Apostle Paul. And he warns about it in his letter.